probably heard the hype around decentralized finance, or DeFi, the promise to completely rebuild banking and cut out the middlemen. But a pretty eye-opening risk assessment just came out from the US Treasury, and it tells a very different story. It suggests that a lot of that decentralization is really just a myth that's creating a brand new playground for criminals. So let's break down what the Treasury actually found and, why it really matters.
I mean, this is it, right? This is the big, exciting question that kicked off the whole DeFi movement. The idea of a financial system that's totally open, runs on nothing but code, and is completely transparent. It's a really powerful vision. But what happens when that dream starts to look more like a liability? Okay, so before we get into the weeds of what's going wrong, let's just talk about the big idea. What was DeFi supposed to be in the first place?
At its core, the whole system runs on these things called smart contracts. And you can just think of them as little programs that live on a blockchain. They automatically handle all the stuff a bank would normally do, lending, borrowing, trading, but without needing the actual bank.
And this was the big sales pitch. No more gatekeepers, no more suits in a boardroom calling the shots, just pure, clean code that would create a fairer, more open financial system for everybody. It sounds amazing, right? But, and this is a big but, the Treasury report basically says, hold on a minute, that's not what's really happening.
And this is where that beautiful promise really starts to fall apart. The report argues that for a whole lot of these so-called DeFi services, decentralization is more of a marketing buzzword than it is reality.
I mean, this quote right here from the Treasury, it says it all. This is a direct shot at the entire industry's core claim. They're basically lifting up the hood and saying, look, when you actually check, there's still a small group of people pulling all the strings.
So you might be asking, where is all this hidden control? Well, the Treasury points to three main things. First, you've got these governance tokens that act like voting shares, but they're often held by just a handful of founders and big investors. Second, almost all of us get to these services through normal websites and apps, which of course can be controlled. And finally, and maybe most importantly, a few key people often hold what are called admin keys, which can literally change the rules of the game or even just shut the whole service down.
And that is the real kicker. When you pretend to be decentralized but you're not, you actually get the worst of both worlds. You have no central accountability, but you still have a central point of failure. And that creates the perfect storm for people who want to exploit the system.
And that brings us to what is, frankly, the most alarming part of this whole report. These vulnerabilities aren't just theoretical risks. They are being actively and, in some cases, brutally exploited.
It turns out these illicit actors have a whole playbook. They're using specific DeFi tools for specific crimes. They use so-called decentralized exchanges and things called mixers to launder dirty money. They go after cross-chain bridges, which are like the highways between different blockchains, to steal enormous sums of money. And sometimes they just find flaws in the code and drain the funds directly.
And the report is crystal clear about who's doing this. We're talking about sophisticated cybercriminals, yes, scammers who pull off those rug pull schemes we hear about. But most disturbingly, we're talking about state-sponsored hacking groups from North Korea, the DPRK. And that changes this from a financial crime story into a real national security threat.
And if you want to get a sense of the scale here, just look at this number, $620 million. That is how much was stolen in a single heist.
And this wasn't some random hack. The US government says it was North Korea's notorious Lazarus Group. They targeted that cross-chain bridge we talked about, this one connected to a really popular online game called Axie Infinity. And the money wasn't just for making someone rich. It was laundered through mixers specifically to fund the DPRK's illegal weapons programs. We're talking ballistic missiles.
Look, when a hostile state is stealing hundreds of millions of dollars to build weapons, it stops being a niche crypto story. It becomes a massive problem for institutions like the US Treasury, and it forces them to step in and figure out how to stop it.
So, what is the government going to do? This last part is all about how regulators see this problem and what their game plan is moving forward. Now, this right here is probably the most important takeaway from the whole report. The Treasury isn't saying the tech itself is evil. What they're saying is that the biggest vulnerability, the biggest risk, comes from these DeFi services just flat out ignoring the financial laws that are already on the books, laws that were designed to prevent this exact kind of criminal activity. And the law they keep coming back to is the Bank Secrecy Act. It's pretty simple. It requires financial institutions to have programs to stop money laundering. The Treasury's position is really firm on this. If a DeFi service looks like a bank and acts like a bank, then it is a bank under the law. Slapping a decentralized label on your website is not a get-out-of-jail-free card.
Okay, so if that's the problem and that's the law, what's the plan? The report lays out a pretty clear strategy. First, they're going to beef up supervision and actually enforce the rules. Second, they plan to engage with the industry to make sure nobody can claim they didn't know the rules. Third, because crypto is global, they have to push other countries to adopt these same standards. And finally, they're basically telling these companies they need to get their act together on cybersecurity.
And so that leaves us with the big unanswered question. DeFi is at a crossroads. As the regulators start to close in, can the industry grow up and build in the safeguards it needs to protect people? Or is that powerful utopian promise of a truly decentralized financial world going to remain just that, a myth?